Good morning. I can't believe a whole week has flown by since I last checked in with you. And if I try and look back on this week, all the days just blur into one. My husband has been playing quite a bit of golf, but being very careful about social distancing. And I've actually got some really good walks in with Bertie Boo. And it's just so lovely to be able to go out and have a real hike and not be restricted to an hour a day. And as a result, I have lost 5 pounds in weight. Now, I always think of weight in bags of sugar. A bag of sugar in the UK is £2, so I've lost 2.5 bags of sugar. And if you pick up 2.5 bags of sugar, it weighs quite a bit. It just goes to show exercise and not having naughty things in the house can help. What else have I been doing? Well, I can't remember if I mentioned in my last video, but I've managed to get some backing board so that I could stretch and lace all the samplers that I had. And I had 14 samplers that needed stretching and lacing. So this week I've done a lot of that, and you can come into my house and you can look at my drawers and my cupboards, and they're looking very, very good at the moment. Lots of time to be a domestic goddess, but there we are. A new word has come into our language, coronaphobia, and I think that we are, or we do have coronaphobia. We are very apprehensive about what we do, and other than Ray playing golf and myself walking, we really are still isolating in our home. It's a bank holiday weekend, which means it's a national holiday weekend. It's Whitsun, and the little beach below our house has been very busy this morning. It concerns us that, you know, more people are coming closer to our home, and you know, this virus is still very, very much here. It's scary, and I can't wait for all this to be over so that I can spend time with my friends, with travelling. We love to travel and we love to socialise as well. This week in the evenings I have done quite a bit of socialising via video calling, and I've had a few nights where I have stitched virtually with friends, and I've been busy working on Jane Hearth. Now, if I had shown you Jane Hearth 2 nights ago, I would have had a lot more to show you, but unfortunately I had a massive unpicking session last night. In fact, last night was spent unpicking about 3 nights worth of work. It happens to us all, it's all part of it, and if this wasn't a model I probably would have left it and worked around it, but as it's a model, and this mistake really did impact on this design growing, so it all had to come out. And when you unpick on 5260, it's difficult because it's hard to get your needle under to unpick the stitch, and you can't use a seam ripper at all because you wouldn't get it under the stitch. And of course you also have to be very careful about not putting a hole in your fabric. So it was a big sigh of relief when I finally finished unpicking last night. But you know, give me a few more nights and I'll be back where I was, feeling happy that I did the right thing. Now, talking of Jane, I feel very much that we are sharing this journey with Jane. I'm charting her and stitching her with the colours from the back of the sampler because that's what the vast majority of the people who watch my Flosstubes wanted me to do. And I want to show you something very, very interesting. And I've got her rolled this way because I want to compare 2 threads. Now I want to take a thread from the central vase. So this is the thread from the vase, and this is a thread from the border. Now if I put those two together, can you see that those are the same colour? Okay, so on the back, those two areas, the border and this big central vase, are the same colour. Now, if I open her up and show you the front of the sampler, you would think that those two greens are a different colour. Now this is a different colour, but all of these and the handles on this vase look a different shade of green to this. And there's probably one or two explanations for this, although it might not be the right reason. When I bought Jane, she came unframed, so we don't know what type of frame she was in, but she may have been in a chunky frame that sort of shaded the borders from direct sunlight. So maybe the centre of the sampler attracted more sunlight, and these colours have bleached more than the border colours. Or it might have been that when Jane stitched her sampler, although she used the same colour greens, they may have been from a different dye lot. Because when this little girl was in her classroom, she wouldn't have gone up and taken a spool or a skein of green and that was hers. She would have gone and she would have taken lengths of thread and gone back to her desk or to her chair and worked with it, and when she ran out she would have gone back for more. So it could have been they were stitched with different dye lots that have just handled sunlight and time differently. That's a possibility. But it just goes to show that you can never really know unless you look at the back of the sampler. So I want to show you one other thing on the back of this sampler that I thought was very interesting. So if we look at this little star here and here, we've got thread loss on this one, but you can see that on this one there's a diamond in the centre. Now if we look at this colour, it's sort of a rich topaz. If we turn this around and we look at this colour from the back, that doesn't look anything like the colour there. In fact, the front of the sampler, it's a darker, richer colour than the back of the sampler. You really don't know until you look at the back of the sampler what those little girls' choices actually were. You can't always look at the back of a sampler. If I bought a sampler that had been conserved and had been attached professionally as part of a conservation of the sampler to a piece of linen, I certainly would not want to take that off, because the less you handle a sampler, the better. And sometimes you acquire samplers that have literally been glued to a board, and if you try to take that off, you're going to damage the sampler. So you can't always access the back of a sampler, but if you can, it's a really, really good idea to do so, because your reproduction will be that much more authentic. Right, okay, so what have I got to show you? And I wanted to focus on silk works. I love little silk works, and these aren't needleworks that young children did. Young ladies and adult ladies would work or spend time embroidering silkwork pictures, and I have a really lovely collection of silkworks. And in my home, if you come, I have one wall that's completely full of all different shapes and sizes of silkworks, and I find them really fascinating. You can learn a lot about the art of embroidery by studying the skills that these ladies used in executing these silkworks. I have one here that it's not finished, and I bought this sampler because I wanted to study the process that they used to stitch these samplers. So where are my glasses? Let's put my glasses on. So with this one, it's a silk fabric that this embroidery is done on, and this was bought with the scene drawn onto the sampler, and we have paper faces. These ladies are painted paper, and these have been glued onto the silk, and we can tell that they have been glued, and I don't think it's going to come across in this video, but you can see that they are lifting off the silk with time, and you can just see glue underneath. This hat is a piece of felt which has been applied, and the paper face has been slipped under the top of the hat. It's unfinished. Oh, you can also see that the tambourine is paper, and that's just lifting off the silk, but this stringed instrument is actually painted on. She has already started to work the bodices and this sashed area of the dress, and she's stitched the shoes and she's stitched all the background, but whoever was working this has not finished. All of these skirts are unstitched, as are these sleeves, although she's put the band across that sleeve and the cuffing. So I don't know why this lady didn't finish this piece. Maybe she just got fed up of it, or maybe she passed away. At some stage somebody has taken the time to frame this, and the frame is very much in keeping with what you would expect for the period. So maybe it was a very loved person's piece of work and her family decided to frame it. We just don't know. But I wanted to share that with you so that you could see the process behind it. Now, I love these silkworks, and I find them very, very pretty. And this one is a particularly charming one. The silk background has a delicate watercolour wash on it to create sort of like the sky. And the colours are very, very pretty. It's such a charming scene. There's a little maid riding a pony, and she has a pannier of vegetables and fruit and flowers, which maybe she's taking to market. Her little face is just angelic, and that's been painted. And this is a really, really interesting piece. When I bought this at auction, there was no photograph of the back of the frame, and when it arrived, my husband looked at it, and he said, "Nicola," he said, "this might have been stitched by the Queen." And my husband is making an appearance in the video now.
Cheerio.
Bye bye. I'm not going to edit it out. Anyway, I went over and had a look, and on the back of the sampler is written Charlotte Knowles, given her by the Queen, year 1902. So we went and googled Charlotte Knowles, and we found out quite a little bit of information about her, and we also found this letter on the internet written by her, and you will see that that is very much the same writing that's on the back of the sampler. So I don't know, but I suspect that if the Queen gave this to Charlotte that the Queen probably stitched this. These aren't really things that the ladies would have gone out and bought. They would have stitched them themselves and gifted them to a friend. So I suspect that Queen Alexandra, the wife of Edward VII, actually stitched this piece of needlework. I don't know for a fact, but that would be the most likely person to have stitched this, as she gifted it to somebody who was a very, very close friend. I love the research that comes with samplers, and when I started to read about Charlotte Knowles, she was a very interesting lady. This is Charlotte, and Charlotte was a she ended up as a private secretary to the Queen. And officially it says Her Majesty's private secretary is of the opposite sex, but there are also women behind the throne, women who not only deal with much of Her Majesty's correspondence, but who are the Queen's intimate friends, advisors and constant companions. And we know that Charlotte Knowles served Queen Alexandra for 50-something years. And it's said, let me just find it, that for 55 years she was the confidential friend of Queen Alexandra. She was a few years older than the Queen, and as I understand it, that she did fall in love, but the Queen asked her not to marry and to remain with her, and Charlotte Knowles did remain with her to the end of her life. And then when the Queen died, Charlotte went to live in a flat in South Audley Street in London, and Queen Alexandra's son, who was then George IV, and his wife Queen Mary, would often go and visit her in her flat when they were king and queen. Charlotte was one of very few people that actually were allowed to call Alexandra Alex. That was a name that was used by Queen Victoria, her husband Edward VII, and maybe her sisters. And King Edward VII nicknamed Charlotte Chatty, so she was known to the family as Chatty, and she actually saved the Queen's life when there was a fire. I loved reading about that, and there is lots and lots of information about this lady who gave her life to serve her Queen, you know, and not married and had children of her own. And samplers, they take you down rabbit holes, and you never know what you're going to find and what you're going to learn. But I love being transported back to the past. Sometimes there are sad things, horrible things, you know, life was short, the loss of young children, the disease, the poverty, but you also learn lots of interesting things about history, and in particular female history. It's fascinating. Anyway, I hope that you've learned a little bit about our video today. So I'm going to say now, until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and bye-bye.